today's session is on more client-side scripting, and we're going to focus on Jquery Ui. Sorry, am I disturbing you? Am I disturbing you? Do you wish to be elsewhere? Please. Okay. So Jquery Ui. So this last session we did was on jQuery. So we introduced the whole idea of the DOM. We looked at jQuery selectors. Remember that? Using the CSS style selectors. We looked at event handling, and we also looked at jQuery effects. Okay. So we covered the basics that we need to know for this session last week. If you're coming in late, you might want to sign a register. There's a register down here. There's another register over there. But if you do come in late, please have the courtesy of keeping the noise down while I'm talking. So we've covered quite a bit already. And this session, we're going to look at a library, an additional library, which is called Jquery Ui. So we're going to cover 4 topics today. The first one is look at how Jquery Ui improves our interfaces. We're going to integrate jQuery into our website, Jquery Ui. We're going to show you how to add widgets to web pages, and I'm going to talk about the 4th assignment. Because we've already covered 60% of the assignment work for this year, and the next assignment's due in 4 weeks' time. Okay? So we've got quite a bit to do and not a huge amount of time to do it. So Jquery Ui is a framework which builds interface widgets. So in other words, it gives you lots of tools and widgets to build into your web pages. And it's built on top of jQuery, which is why we had to cover jQuery last week. Without jQuery, you can't really get your head around Jquery Ui. Now, I know that in one of the labs this Monday, Colin started talking to some of you guys about Jquery Ui. Is that right? Did some demos. So some of this will be familiar. I'm going to cover a bit more of the theory with you than perhaps you were covered in the lab. But it's going to set you up for the 4th assignment. So the important thing to know is that Jquery Ui is not jQuery. It's on top of jQuery. It's an extra level of abstraction that sits on top of jQuery. And there are a series of different components. There are interactions, which we'll not go into today. There are widgets, which we will go into today. And there are effects. Now remember the jQuery effects we did last time? Remember the hide, the show, the dissolves, and so on? There's a whole lot of more effects you can now use with Jquery Ui. But we're going to focus mainly on how we build this into our pages. Okay, there are 3 ways that you can build Jquery Ui into your web page. And they pretty much match what we do, the first 2 at least, match what we did with jQuery. You can link to the CDN, remember the Content Delivery Network, where you link to jquery.com and you can just pull the files in from their web servers. Or you can download the whole library, which is called a development download, and I'll explain why in a minute. But because the library is so huge, you can build custom versions of the library with just including the bits you want out of the library. And that's what you normally do for a distribution website. Now, it builds from last week. If you want this to work, you have to include 3 files in your header file, in your head section. The jQuery library is mandatory. So exactly the same library we used last week, you have to include that as well in your web page. But because jQuery has additional libraries, Jquery Ui has additional libraries, you've got to include those additional libraries in your web page. So the Jquery Ui library is another JavaScript file which you must include if this is going to work. And the final thing is, because these are widgets, you need style. So you have to include a style sheet in your page. And there are lots of themes that you can use, and depending on which theme you use, the URL will be different. And you can even build your own themes for this. So if you want to go for the high grades on this assignment, you can roll your own themes and include them in your web page. But I'm going to cover the basics with you. Sorry, am I putting you off here? So you're on your phone. I guess you've got better things to do. So the easiest way by far is at the bottom of the page, bottom of every single page on the Jquery Ui website, all the download options are listed. So all you've got to do is scroll to the bottom and you can choose the option you want. If you're going to include the CDN versions, it literally gives you the 3 files you've got to copy and paste into the links into your website. So that's the way I tend to do it. I just include those 3 links in there. So you've got your CSS and 2 JavaScript files. The order in which they're on this page is the correct order. So you link to a CSS file, then your jQuery file, then your jQuery UI file. And if you look carefully at the path of the CSS, can you see it says smoothness on there? You see that? That's the name of the theme. That's the default theme. So if you want a different theme, you simply substitute the theme name in that URL and you'll get the correct theme. So it's really easy. They've made it as easy as possible. You can see at the bottom, you can download the development bundle, which is the whole of jQuery UI, including jQuery, which is quite a big download. You can build themes with a theme link, and you can download a custom version by clicking on the Builder tool. So everything you need for all 3 options is listed there. The easiest way is just to include 3 files at the top. You've got your link to your style sheet. You've got 2 script tags, one to the jQuery file and one to the jQuery UI file. If you do it that way, you can't go wrong. Remember the benefits of CDNs? If someone else has already downloaded it for another website, it's already cached in the browser, so it's a lot faster. So just remember that if you do that, the style sheet link has to change based on the theme you've chosen. And if you choose a custom theme, you have to obviously link to your custom theme for that. Okay, the whole library is available. So if you want to work offline to do your work without an internet connection, you can download the entire library, and you need to place that folder where your website is, whether it's on the web server or whether it's on your desktop of your computer. Remember, it's client-side scripting, so it doesn't have to be tested and developed on the web server. It could just be on your computer at home. And then you have to add links to your pages, and it's not quite as easy to add the links because you have to know which files to link to. Because as you can see, it downloads 46 files when you download the whole framework. And you've got to link to the 3 precise files to get this working. Now, these are the links you need. You can see that in the style sheet, I've linked to the base theme because there's a base folder in there with the basic theme in. If you create your own themes, you obviously drag them into the folder and change the link to your own theme, and it will link to your theme. And then the jQuery UI, you can see, you just link straight to the files inside the folder. Okay, so that should give you the idea of what you need to link to get this to work. Okay, now, the development bundle, you should only use that for developing your website, because there's lots of widgets and themes and effects and everything else, and every widget and theme and effect is an extra file the user's got to download. So when you're testing it, you're not quite sure what you're going to use, by all means download everything. But when you've finished, identify what you've chosen and then build a custom download. And there's an online tool to actually let you choose the bits you want and exclude all the bits you don't want. Otherwise, people will spend ages downloading these 46 files onto their computer unnecessarily. Now, the download builder, and I'll show you in a minute, is where you tick the bits you want, you click on download, and it actually adds all the bits into a zip file, just the bits you want, and downloads a zip file for you. So it excludes things you don't need. And that's what it looks like. So you've got your core, which you have to have, widgets and mouse and position, interactions and widgets. And so you can just choose exactly the bits you need to get jQuery UI working on your website. I can't emphasize enough, development bundle is purely for development purposes and not for deployment. Okay, themes. jQuery comes with a large range of themes, different color schemes and styles for your website. And the chances are the themes it comes with are going to be perfectly okay for your website. But you can always build a custom theme for it because it's just CSS. So you can either download the standard theme and then open the CSS up and play with it and change it, okay? Or you can use a graphical tool to choose the colours and the themes you want, and then it will download the CSS for you, build the CSS file for you, okay? If you're going to go for the high grades on this, you should be at least using a custom theme. For the maximum grade, tweaking the theme is recommended to get it to match the style of your website, okay? And all the CSS it downloads, it's loads of comments in it to explain exactly how it works. And if you use the tools like, if you use the Chrome developer tools, you can actually see which bits of the CSS correspond to which parts of the page and build a custom theme. If you want to do the graphical approach to this, under themes there's something called Theme Roller. And it basically allows you to tweak the different elements on the page, and it shows you how they're going to look. So you can play around with the style, get exactly the style you want, and when you're finished, there's a link at the bottom of the page and it downloads the modified style sheet for you. And all you've then got to do is stick it on the website and link the style sheet to your copy of the website. Does that make sense? So the jQuery interaction stuff is just download and use. The style stuff, you either point to the standard styles or you create your own style, stick it in the folder on your web server and just link to your custom style. Okay, so it's very, very flexible. And you find Jquery Ui is used on lots and lots of different websites. There you are. So basically, each theme's in a different folder. You just download, you create your theme, stick it in a folder and link to the folder. And in your folder there's a file called jQueryUI.css and that is your style. That's the style sheet. But obviously you can do some really sort of cool work with this and custom work. Okay, the widgets. Now, I'm going to break these into two sections. This week I'm going to talk about general widgets for task 1 and task 2. And next week I'm going to focus on form widgets, things like the date pickers, the sliders, and the validation tools. So this week I'm going to focus on a couple of widgets and kind of show you how you can use them and the syntax. Because I think the hardest bit is the syntax. So here's a button widget. It's the easiest one I could find to show you the basics. And the button widget, you can take a hyperlink or a submit button on your form or a button tag, you know, HTML5 button tags, and you can turn it into one of these nice buttons where you've got the top one's the standard one, the middle one's rollover, and the third one's the click. So it's nice and easy one to show you and show you how jQuery Ui works. When you see how it works, you'll realise how easy this is. Trust me. And I say easy, even easier than PHP. Okay, that didn't go down too well, did it? But before we start, let's think about our separation of concerns. Now, this is not shown on the tutorials. This is something which I think you should be doing anyway. When I've included the 3 files, remember last week we had the jQuery JavaScript file, didn't we, for our behaviours. The trouble is, some of the stuff I'm showing you today is behaviour, but some of it is appearance. How the widget looks is appearance, isn't it? How we interact with it is behaviour. So I tend to add 2 JavaScript files to my web page. So my jQuery file has all my sort of behaviours and interactions in, and I've got a jQuery Ui file to hold the appearance stuff. So when I'm working on interactions, I know which file to look at. When I want to change the look and feel of something, I look at the other file. Because otherwise you're mixing your behaviour and your appearance in one file, and that's not good. Yeah, that kind of breaks what we've been trying to achieve since October. So let's keep the 2 things separate. Now let's have a look at this. Dollar function. Okay, that looks a bit weird, doesn't it, as a syntax. All it's doing, so I'll show you in a minute. All that is doing, it's waiting until the DOM is loaded. Remember we had the document ready function last time? Because we use that so often, this is a shorthand way of doing the same thing. And I'm showing this to you not because you have to use it, but because when you see examples on websites, they'll often use this syntax, and I want you to be familiar with this so you know what it's doing. Dollar function is purely has the same effect as document ready. It achieves it in a slightly different way by using scoping, but it achieves exactly the same end result. And look at it. I mean, seriously, that's it. The first line is just sending a log to the console to say it's working. And whenever I have a method, an event, a handler like this, I always put a console log message in there, so when I'm debugging, I can see it's actually worked. Otherwise, you don't know anything's happened. But what should happen is automatically your link will turn into a button if you've done this properly. So what I would do is I would treat this as a hello world example. And when you get your link your files into your page, use this as a simple example to make sure things are working properly and everything's loading. And that's it. So I've said if it's an A tag or a button tag, there's my selector, then apply the button method. And that will turn my link into a nice JavaScript button, a nice Jquery Ui button. So nice and easy, a nice simple way of achieving this. Okay, now let's look at that console.log. In the past, as in a week ago, when I told you about JavaScript, I introduced the alert, didn't I, where you could pop an alert on the screen to see if something was working. Remember, alert, and then you could just put something in the quotes, in the brackets? The trouble is, it's really intrusive, isn't it? When it runs, if you've got lots of messages, you keep having to click on OK all the time. And if you accidentally leave those alerts in, when the end user tests your website out, it'll pop up for them on the screen. So it's not really very helpful. So what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to show you the JavaScript console. And the great thing about the JavaScript console is every web browser has this. You can send as much text to it as you want, and if it doesn't interrupt the flow of your program, it just simply logs stuff in the background. You can look at it if you want to look at it, you can ignore it if you don't want to use it. So, this is the Safari version, or the Chrome version, the Firefox version, dare I say the Internet Explorer version, they all work in exactly the same way. There's a couple of features of this. First of all, I can log by level. So can you see I've selected logs? If I've got any errors on my page, if I click on the errors tab there, it will display any errors that are in the JavaScript, so I can track down which line number the errors occurred on. If I choose all, I get everything. I can choose warnings. In other words, you might want to do something about this, but it's not going to break the page. So it's a good idea to have this open all the time so you can see what's going on in your program. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is there's always a clear button. So in other words, before you test a page out, you can clear the log, so you've got an empty log screen, so you can narrow down the issue. The most important feature, though, is at the bottom. There's my log messages. Remember that one that said loading Jquery Ui styles? Remember that console.log? Well, there it is, and it tells me not only the message, but it tells me on the right-hand side the file it came from, which JavaScript file it was, and which line number triggered it. So it's always a good idea, for example, whenever you have these event handlers, the clicks and things, to always have a little message to the console so you know it's working. Otherwise you can be clicking on the button and nothing's happening. And you can start tracking errors and tracing errors that way. So the JavaScript console is a really, really powerful tool, really important for you to learn. And all you do, here's an event handler, by the way. Look for the hyperlink. Remember the button we just styled? Console.log, handler for click called. So if I go back a page, you can see, look, handler for click called. And you can see, there's my console log loading the event handlers, so I know that's worked. When I click on the button, I get the handler for .click called in the log file, so I can trace everything through. And when you finish tracing and you're happy, just put 2 forward slashes in front of the console log to hide it, so it doesn't run. So console.log is probably your best debugging tool of all. And when you ask for help in labs or in Sigma, we've assumed that you've gone through this process, that you've put lots of log messages in and you've traced down to where the problem is. And if you put lots of messages in, you can track it down to the exact line that's causing the problem, especially if you use the errors and the warnings messages. You should be able to track every mistake and every error in your code. So when you come to us with an error, you can say the error is this file, this line, and then we can help you debug it. So it's really useful to know this. So what are the benefits? You can see exactly what's going on in your code. You can see if the lines run, if you put a console log before the problematic line and the console log after the line that's causing you problems. If the first one runs and the second one doesn't run, you know that's where the problem is, don't you? It's crashing on that particular line. If they both run, you know the line's running. If you've got no errors or warnings, you know there's not a problem with the code. So it's probably probably a logical error somewhere. So this is something I want you to practice using all the time. It's unobtrusive. You leave the log messages in and your end users start using your website, it won't affect how they use the website, will it? Unless they pop open the JavaScript console, they'll never know about these log messages. And it's always a sign of an efficient programmer and a professional programmer to use these log, the console log. And debugging is much easier if you know what's going on. Okay, now I've shown you a simple widget and you saw how easy that was. I'm now going to show you how you handle the more complex widgets. So here we have a dialog. And as you can see, what all the widgets do, they take standard HTML and they turn it into something graphical, don't they? Well, all you do for a widget is you place some text inside the div and give it an ID. And you can give it a title. And if you give it a title, the title gets converted into the title of the widget. You can see that, can't you, where it says information. Whatever's inside that div tag gets turned into the contents of the widget. So you can have little pop-up widgets on the screen to help people use your website. So let's see how we do this. Let's kind of build this up step by step and look at how this code works. First thing you've got to do is make sure that you give the div an ID, because you need to be able to select it to apply the style to it. And let's have a look at the style, how we apply the style. It's a bit more complicated now, but if we break this down, you'll see what's going on. First of all, can you see the selector, ID dialog? Yeah, like we did with CSS, like we did with the previous example. So hash dialog means any div or any tag with an ID of dialog is going to get selected. And then we say, apply the dialog style, just like we had button, didn't we? But instead of having empty parameters, we've now got some extra parameters, and all these parameters are optional. And when we look at the documentation, you'll see how each of these parameters is documented. And the parameters are in the form of a dictionary. And the dictionary is a pair of key value pairs. Remember we had $_post with PHP, and the key was the field name, wasn't it? The form ID, and the value was the contents. It's the same idea, but the syntax is a bit weird. You know it's a dictionary because it starts with a curly bracket. Let's go back a page. There. There's a curly bracket there which says, and that curly bracket means dictionary. And if you do 305 next year, you'll get so familiar with this because we use this all the time. So there's the beginning of the dictionary, and there's the end of the dictionary. That is one dictionary, so that will contain key value pairs. So let's look first of all. There's a simple key value pair. You see that? There's the key, auto open, and the value is false. And when you look that up in the documentation, what it says is, when the page loads, should it be visible? And I've said no. I want it hidden until someone you click somewhere. And when I click somewhere, I want to pop the dialog open. That sort of makes sense. Having said that, if you've got instructions for your page, you might want to pop the dialog up when the page first loads, and then they dismiss it by clicking across. In which case, you would say true. And that means when the page loads, it will set its visibility to true. Okay, this is interesting. There's the key. The value is actually another dictionary. Look, can you see little curly brackets again? So some parameters take a dictionary as their value. And of course, the dictionary also has key value pairs. So we're going further and further into this, aren't we? So the show key has a value which contains several key value pairs. So this one says fade. So when it shows, I want to have an animation of fade, so it fades in. And I want it to take 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. So it will fade in half a second. Okay, now between each of the key value pairs, can you see there's a comma in the dictionary? So there's the start of the dictionary, there's the key value pair, there's a comma, there's the next key value pair, which is the dictionary, there's a comma, there's another key value pair, and that's the end. So each of the key value pairs in the dictionary is separated with a little comma, separates them all out. And even in here, look, can you see, because there's two entries there, I have to put a comma because I've got two key value pairs in that dictionary. That's what those commas are all about. They separate out the key value pairs in the dictionary. And when you set the parameters for your widgets, that's all you're doing. You're assigning key value pairs. And all the parameters are optional. If I didn't put any parameters in there, it would just appear on the screen and it would just disappear when I clicked on the cross. So even without any parameters, it still has some functionality involved. So the idea is you use the parameters to customize how it works and improve the behavior of it. Now, remember these funny curly brace bracket semicolons? The reason I've got two is because the outer one is for the function, because that has curly brace, bracket, curly brace, bracket, they nest. The inner one is for this $dialog. You see? So it's always important to tab in, to indent your code nicely, like you did in Python last year, remember? To indent your code so you can understand it. Without any code indent, it still works, but debugging it's going to be an absolute nightmare, isn't it? Trying to figure out what's gone wrong with it. Whereas this nice layout, you can see exactly how this fits together without having to dig too much into the code. And you'd know if there's a bracket missing because there'd be in line, there'd be something missing there or something missing there, and they all line up. If you're worried about which bits match up with which bits, by all means put a little comment at the end of the closing bracket. So that one might say / dialog, that could say / function. And that will keep track of which closing bracket goes with which opening bracket. The closing bracket stuff, if you've used to Python, can be a bit of a pain. Because in Python you haven't got these closing braces, have you? You just stop indenting your code. Whereas with JavaScript and PHP, you have to think about C++. And C++. This is very similar to C++. So this is important that you know how to indent and how to nest and how to close your brackets. When I do this, what I tend to do, if I use Komodo Edit, it automatically adds the closing braces for me. So every time I open the bracket, it puts a closing one in for me. And if you do that, it should have the right numbers. If you miss one out, you'll get an error where it'll basically overrun the end of the code looking for a closing brace. And you'll get an error in your console. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. The important thing is documentation, documentation, documentation. Now this year you're using documentation. Next year in 305 you're going to be writing documentation for your own APIs. So getting used to how documentation works is really important. And as you can see, this is the example, the quick nav for the dialog. And as you can see, look, there's the options: auto open, and then there's some events. Look, open, close, and everything is documented in detail in that documentation. So you can look through and decide what you want: heights, widths, draggable, stack. A method is open, destroy, move to top. So generally, a good API is an API not that has everything you need, but an API that has everything you need in the documentation. It's very difficult to figure out how something works if there's no documentation for it. Okay, here's a widget event. So this is going to my Jquery file now, you know, the event handlers. Now, this is really easy. Look there, click function, console log, we've had that before, dialog, .dialog open. Okay. So there's my open method. I simply place that in quotes as a parameter. And that's how we call the methods on it. So it's a little bit weird. But basically that will open the dialog. And if you've got any on... Okay. And that's how we use widget events. Okay, so it's very, very simple. So I've covered simple widgets, how you add them to a page, how you link your files to the page, and how you add simple widgets. I've shown you how all the parameters work. That's it. But let's look at what we do next, how we take advantage of our Jquery Ui libraries. Because I could spend, there's so many widgets in there, there's about 15 widgets. I could spend a whole hour just talking about the different widgets. The idea is I've given you pointers to explore the jQuery UI library. I'm going to show you the sort of steps you should be going through now to take advantage of this library in your assignment. Demos. First tab on the jQuery UI page is called Demos. And you can literally choose any widget or anything you want, and it gives you on-screen demos. You can actually play with it. And when you've got the version you want, because there's many versions, you can click on the link which says show me the code. And whatever version you've just built, it'll show you the exact code that's just used to create that version. So you can literally look at the code and borrow it and modify it in your web page. If you do that, you're looking at a 3 for this assignment to get that working, because you've just taken what's already there, but you've got it working in